All right, we're going to start up. This is going to be a little bit weird in that what I'm going to do during some of the rest of the week is I'm going to go over chapters 4, 5, and 6. Now, that said, when you have your test on Monday of next week, it's only going to be on 1 to 3. All right? So I'm actually kind of going ahead, but I didn't want to give you a test during the first week. You know, typically people kind of get squirmy when that happens, and and they're like, oh geez, now I screwed it up, now the whole semester's shot, type of thing. And I don't want that. I don't think that's going to happen to any of you anyway. But one of the things I'm going to do is I've got to go back because they have revamped and redone some of the tests that are in here, and I've got to watch what I'm saying because this is being taped. It's not the way I would have done it. How's that? But we are supposed to be teaching the same thing here. We actually had a student 2 years ago, Grace, who her first year, she spent at the St. Louis campus. She lives in Baldwin. She took during at the end of her first year, she drove over here and decided she liked that drive better. All right. So she transferred here for her second year. And they were saying about the importance that the homework we give, the tests we give, they want them to be the same. All right. And I'm not going to lie to you, they're powered by St. Louis. And I don't say that in a bad way. All right. The difference, though, is the instructors at the St. Louis campus, by and large, teach one class a semester, where I've got two. So they've got a little bit more time to work on it. And that's okay. Like I said, I don't have any problems with it. But we're going to have to go over some stuff either Thursday or Friday that you're going to need for your first test. That's stuff I wouldn't have covered until later. It's not that it's hard stuff, but it's different. Okay? So with that said, now what I did, just so you're aware of this, where is that? Is this morning I came back in and I redid the stuff for the end of chapter 2 where we did the validation because I forgot to tape it yesterday. And I redid chapter 3. The chapter 3 is down here. When it says deleted video, it's still being produced. So it should be up there in about 10 or 15 minutes, but they'll all be up there. And while I did it, what I did was I went back, and this is what I'm going to show you here. All right, I went through, and so that my website here looks a little bit different, and I want to show you what I mean. All right, I added a form. You don't need to know what forms are. You don't, not right now. It's like chapter 11 in the book. But this is where I mentioned to you that if you were to put in something like this, script, and then you put in that alert, if you remember me saying that yesterday, that it could cause bad things to happen. All right. And what you want to do is instead of that, you want to make sure that gets changed to the character entities, because that won't allow bad things to happen. So the reason I'm telling you that is I explained some stuff in a little more depth and breadth of coverage this morning when I redid these than I probably did in class. All right. And I just didn't want anybody to be real surprised. I added another image. All right. I just went out there and grabbed another puppy. I didn't care about the size, but what I wanted to show right here is that images are inline elements, which means that if I've got room for 10 of them in one row, all 10 are going to be shown there. But if I were to come through here, so in order to do this, I remove that figure and the fig caption. All right. So I went through here, and I'm going to put them back in here to show you what the difference is. Okay. So I went in to the CSS file and I commented out a bunch of stuff in here. So for the image, if I change it to display block, then only one image appears on a line because it's a block level element. Images, again, are inline elements by default. Block level means just show one on a line. All right. And the margin left auto, remember yesterday I had problems centering this? When you say margin left auto and margin right auto, that should center it. So in other words, what I'm telling you here is if I go and take all this stuff that I put in and I uncomment it, and notice that when you write comments in CSS code, you start them with a slash star and you end them with a star slash. HTML is a little odd in that most other programming languages, you do it that way. That's the same way we'll do it in JavaScript. All right. So, but I'm going to uncomment these. All right. And I think that's all I'll have to uncomment in here. Oh, I'll talk about that in just a minute, but that's fine. So I'm going to do a file, save, and I'm going to come back here. And then notice now I said basically set them up to block level. So you see the difference? All right. Now the reason that those figures aren't showing, even though I undid them, is I also had to undo them in the HTML. So let me put those back in. So I'm going to go back to the index here. And you can see I commented all that stuff out. So I'm going to uncomment that and that. And for some reason I lost my beginning figure tag there. Put that back in. All right, so now everything is uncommented that's in there, except that JavaScript, and that's just because we don't want that alert to show. All right, now when I come back here, notice, okay, my figure captions, etc. are in there, but the other point is, by saying the margin left and margin right, 0 auto, those auto things, that centered them on the screen. All right, and how did I couldn't remember how to do it. I don't know why, but I just couldn't. So literally all I did was I Googled how to center an image using CSS. All right, and I just grabbed the first one I found. Sometimes when I do that, I'll grab the W3 schools. Sometimes I'll just grab whatever one is first. All right, if it's not W3 schools. Now, the other thing is, you may or may not have noticed this, but by default, now I give really simple definitions. So when I say by default, I mean unless told otherwise. Any browser automatically puts in a little bit of padding and margin. We talked a little bit about padding and margin yesterday, but all browsers put it in. Why? Because if you didn't have it in, it would look pretty bad. What do I mean? I'm going to show you right now what I mean. All right, so if I come in there, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I'm also going to mention it to you and show it to you right now, and that is, if I come back in here and I go to my CSS, you'll notice this is commented out. I'm going to uncomment it. When you put an asterisk at the beginning, it's kind of like a wild card character. What this means is for this entire website, have there be no margin, have there be no padding. All right, so stuff is going to look real crunched together. Why the heck would I do that? The reason I would do that is now I can go to anything that's in here and put my own margin and my own padding in. So the idea is it will look more uniform between different browsers. All right, and that's the reason for it. Now, when I do that, just like this, notice how this changes. Now that's a pretty big change. Everything is pushed over. You really can see, as I told you before, with this being a block level element, how there was a little bit of padding over there. There's no padding now. Now, that is one way to do this. And that is the way that some people, not everybody, this is the way that some people start off their web pages. Okay? And I'm going to show you quickly. So I'm going to come back to here, and I'm going to literally remove this because I'm going to show you the way most people do it. All right, so let me just remove this. And as soon as I do and I save, boom, it's back to looking better again. All right, and I made a couple changes to the contact page too that we're going to talk about in just a minute. All right, but what they talk about in the book is I'm going to come out here and I'm just going to Google normalize.css. That is a file that will basically kind of turn off the default settings for most everything. All right. So if I go and click on it, it says, here's normalized CSS. I'm not going to read this. You can all read it yourselves, right? But if I click the download button right here, there's the file. And I'm not going to go through it. Some of it would make a lot of sense to you. Some of it would just confuse you. And I don't want to do that. All right. But Now if I take this file, all right, it's not my file, but if I take it and I right mouse click on it and I choose to save as, I'm going to go and I'm going to save that, not in my images folder, but in my CSS folder. I will now have two files in there. I will have normalized.css, which I'm about to save, and I'll have my one that I created, styles.css. So I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to go back in, and I'd have to put it in both pages, but I'm going to show this to you in the index page. All right? And I'm going to grab what I put in here yesterday, and I'm just going to copy it twice. Now, if you use a normalized file, it must go first, because you're overwriting what's in the normalized file. So if I put my CSS file first, then the normalized is going to overwrite all the stuff I've done. But I can now come in here and say normalize.css. All right, so I'm going to save that. Now you'll notice when we come back, whoops, looks not exactly like it did before. In fact, I got to go to the other page, but more similar to the way it did originally. All right, there's nothing wrong with normalized CSS. This is the one the book uses. It's totally fine. But I do want to show you one more alternative that you have if you're interested. All right. Now, I'm going to say a name in here, and you probably either say, well, I heard of him, but I don't know who the heck he is, or I don't know who that is. When I was a kid, there was a show on TV called American Bandstand. All right, where different singers would come on every week and plug their records and play their records, etc. The reason I'm telling you that, the guy who hosted it is Dick Clark. All right, you might have even noticed now that like Ryan Seacrest on New Year's Eve, he does Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve. Dick Clark died quite a few years ago. The reason I'm telling you this though is somebody asked him once, they said, you know, Dick, you're the father of rock and roll. And he said, no, I'm not, but I like to think I assisted in the birth. The reason I'm telling you that is there is a guy out here named Eric Myers. He's kind of the Dick Clark of CSS. He has created his own reset file. All right. So what is Eric Myers reset? That's what I put in here. All right. So you can go out to CSS tools, Meyer.web, etc., and you can find it. It's out here someplace. So let's see. CSS reset Eric Meyer. Maybe it's Meyer, not Myers. I don't know. But actually, I believe this is the whole file right here. This is it. Now, what does it do? I want to show this to you, okay? So I'm just going to grab every bit of it. And I'm going to come into here. I know I'm doing it in a different editor, but notice what it's doing. It's saying for almost every tag there is in this language, turn off the margin, turn off the padding, have no border, make it be the default font size, etc. Now, you don't have to do this. Our book asks that you put in normalized.css. I believe even on your first test, you will be asked to do that. What you may want to do, you can do it now, you can do it later, is you might want to go ahead and copy that file and just put it out on your desktop so you can drag it in for every project as you need it. All right, but I'm going to take this one and I'm just going to save it. And again, I'll go back to my website too, CSS, and I'm going to call it Eric M CSS reset.css. Like that. All right, and I'm going to close it. And what you'll notice is if I come back here, whoops, if I come back into here and I do CSS slash, well, I thought it would show it in there, CSS slash, I don't know why it's not, but what do we call it? Eric M CSS. Eric, okay, M CSS reset dot CSS. And again, even if that's wrong, it's not a big thing. But what I'm trying to tell you and show you is typically most developers put some kind of a reset file at the beginning, and they don't make it themselves. If you do want to make it yourself, I already showed you how to do that. You put in an asterisk, and that says basically set anything else. We could have set a bunch of stuff out here just like they did in the other two files. All right, I showed you an unbelievably simplistic one, and that unbelievably simplistic one, all right, that just had a couple things in it, margin and padding. All right. And again, I do want you to understand, because sometimes when people look at this, they're like, okay, I get it. But why? Because you want total control over how your page is set up. And ideally, as much as possible, you want your page to resonate and render the same way, whether the person is using Edge or Firefox or Opera or Chrome or whatever. That's what you want. What's called the UX today, which is the user experience. It's really interesting because what's happening today is there are a lot of, I'm not making this up, there are a lot of students who go through, like my daughter. She went through 4 years of college and got a psychology degree. There's nothing wrong with a psychology degree. I don't think, unless you're going to become a psychologist, a lot of times it doesn't lead to a job, but it did for her, and something that's sort of, well, I wouldn't even say sort of semi-related. But what some psychology students are doing today is companies are hiring them as UX people. UX is user experience. That's the experience you and I get when we go out to a website. You know, it's the warm and fuzzy they want you to have when you go out to a site. All right. Now, not every site's like that. I went out the other day and was checking because I thought there was a problem in my Social Security. So I went out, I think it's ssa.gov. You know what? That's a textual site. There's a logo on the top, and basically everything else in there is text. They could give to, a rat's butt about, user experience. But, there's so much competition out there, and so many people today, let's face it, with COVID and whatever, they're buying stuff online. Everybody would like to be the next Amazon, if you could, but if you're going to try to grab a niche of that market, one way you can do that is if you're going to have a big social media presence and a big, internet presence, is to try to make the user's experience as pleasurable as possible. All right? Okay. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything in here. I didn't change anything in there. So again, with the image, by saying display block, that turned it from an inline element, which you saw two on a line, to a block level element, where each one of them were on their own line. And the centering said, I want it centered on the left. Auto means basically center it. Left and right, I wanted it centered. I could have also done margin top and margin bottom. There was no need to do that. All right. I think, Nick, I think you were the one yesterday that asked about this. So when you want to go in, I'm going to go back to the second page here. And on the second page, I made this. It was stupid, but I just made it in here. So I made an unordered list and an ordered list. And I've got for my unordered list, recipe ingredients for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I just kept it simple. All right. So the ingredients are peanut butter, jelly, and your favorite bread. That's what I put in there. Don't tell me, I can put it on a bagel. I could care less. Because you get the idea. It's just 3 simple things that are in here. That's it. All right. So the order does not matter in this case. So we made it an unordered list. Since it's a UL, then in the styles file, notice here, this is the default disk, which means a colored in circle. The other 2 options you have are circle, and you'll notice when I do this, let me close that. Let me close that. All right. Now, there's circles that are not colored in. All right. If I go back again and make it a disk, now there's circles that are colored in. All right. there's a couple more things that we can do here. So let's quickly look at them. All right. I'm sure I'm going to screw this one up, but I'm going to try it anyway. So I'm going to go out to images.google.com, and I'm going to say here star thumbnail, which means I just want a small picture of a star. I'll try this one. This would probably work as well as anything. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to save the image as. I want to go to my images folder and I'm going to call this what it is, star.ping. All right. And I'm going to show you this one in just a second. But before I do, the other one is square. When we put that in, you'll notice they're now squares. The other thing that you can do in here is you can say none. Oops, not like that. And now you have nothing here. Totally fine to do that. All right. I'm going to say custom unordered list item CSS. I just want to show it to you the right way. So let's see. There it is. So it's a little bit different when you do it this way. I'm going to try and see if we can get the stars to come in there. Okay? So it's list style image, first of all. URL. So you got to tell it where it is and where it lives, etc. This can be in double quotes or in single quotes. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to put it in double quotes and I'm going to say images / star dot, I think it was star dot ping. We'll find out. All right, like that. I'm going to save. Big reveal. It didn't work. So either I gave it the wrong path or the wrong name. So let's see. So here's images. It says star.ping. Sometimes this gets a little flaky. You need a slash sometimes you don't need a slash. And if that doesn't work, well, I guess that's too big. See that? So that actually is a good, as they say, this is a teaching moment. So let's make it a teaching moment. And I'll show you this because this isn't in your book. This is just something that I teach myself, I guess so. So I'm going to go out here to website 2, and I'm going to go out to images, and I'm going to take this. If I put my mouse over it, it says it's 225 by 225, which is way too big. So I'm going to right mouse click on it, and I'm going to open it with Paint. And then I'm going to just go and click on Resize and go to Pixels. And you'll notice it's 225 by 225. So I'm going to try changing it. What if I make it 25 by 25? Well, that's a lot better. All right. And now I'm just going to save it. And now if I go in, you can see the difference. Now, that wasn't a great example, all right, as far as, showing you this. You could make your own custom thing, size it any way you wanted to size it, etc. Does that make sense, though? I just wanted to show that to you so you saw it. All right. The other one that's in here, and I don't even know why, but for some reason it looks like I lost my other one. Oh, that's because it's on the other page. So there you can see it a little better. Okay? All right. So let's look at the other one, which is an ordered list. So if I come in here for my ordered list, by default, it's number. But I can make it number. I can make it uppercase Roman numerals, lowercase Roman numerals, uppercase alpha, or lowercase alpha. Now, I'm not going to take the time to go through all of them with you. But now it's upper Roman. Let's make it lower Roman. All right, so it's the OL that you apply this to. And notice it's list style type. Remember, so was this. But you use image when you want to put in your own image. Does that all make sense? All right. So now I changed this to list style type lower Roman. I'll save to make sure I've got it saved. And now, see how it changed? All right, let's just change it one more time. Like I said, I don't want to run through all these, but I'll make it upper alpha. And you can see how it changed immediately. Does that stuff all make sense to everybody? All right. And again, I'm just trying to be complete here. That's all. I didn't want, when I went back, I thought, well, maybe I kind of missed this. If you don't know it and you're going to get all this stuff, my goal is by tomorrow. I'm going to give you all of the books, PowerPoint slides, etc. And I've done lectures on all those. They're out there on the YouTube channel. So if you want more in-depth than we're getting in class, all right, then you can go out and look at those if you're interested. Again, if you're not, I'm doing for you guys. And if you don't want to look at them, that's totally fine. I'm not offended. All right. So I think that's pretty much everything. Quickly look through here, make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't see anything that I missed there. Again, I added this form. I don't want that to throw you at all. And what I mean by that is I think it's chapter 11 in the book, you're going to learn how to make your own forms. They're not hard to do. They're really not. But there's things, for instance, you typically put in here action and you put in method. I don't want to get into that now because there's no reason to get into that now. We will get into it though. All right. Okay. So let's jump into the next chapter then. And again, when I'm going through this, if I'm saying something that you don't agree with or you don't understand, by all means, please raise your hand and ask, okay? All right. So chapter 4, looks like we're on around page 123 already. After you code the HTML, it says you're ready to code the CSS style rules. In this chapter, you learn to code all types of selectors. Let me just say this from the get-go. You won't remember everything that's in here. You will be constantly going back to sites like W3 Schools. I do all the time. All right, because there's a lot of different ways that you can code these selectors. Some of them, the ones that I'm most comfortable with, those are the ones I use most often. There's other ones, I use them, what do they say, once in a blue moon or whatever, that I have to look them up. All right, and I've already given you a couple sites that you can go to for that. Now, the first thing they're going to talk about is what we've already talked about. The 3 ways that you can provide CSS styles. If you remember yesterday when I showed you that hello world thing and we made that H real big, that's typically referred to as inline CSS. That's the worst type because you are intermixing your CSS right inside of your HTML elements. It's not that you can't do it. It's just recommended that you don't do it. All right. The second way that we looked at was what was typically referred to as internal CSS. And that's when you put those style tags in your head section. All right. And typically you do that so it only applies for a page. If you grab everything you put in those style tags, if you remove the style tags, but grab all the guts, so to speak, and put it in its own file, that's the best way to do it. That's external CSS. So those are the 3 ways. All right, now I don't know what the 2 ways for browser functionality is. We'll look at it in a minute. How to specify measurements and colors. With colors, it's a good news, bad news thing, because I'm going to show you 5 different ways that you can set up colors. And you'll say, well, I'm going to use this one. It's the easiest. And that's the one they recommend you don't use. And I'll explain why that's the case in just a little bit. All right, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about measurements. The idea behind this class is when you start thinking about website development and design, you should be thinking of mobile first. You should be thinking, how is this going to look on a phone? Really. And you build out from there because the hardest way to do it is for a phone. It is. All right. And when you're doing that, you don't typically think, well, what about somebody who's got one of those flip phones or somebody who's got a real old iPhone? No, you don't. That typically isn't a concern. All right. You look at kind of the latest and greatest type of things, and you want it to look good, and you want it to look good both in portrait mode and in landscape mode. All right. Okay. So we'll talk about that. With the selectors, this is where I said it'll get a little bit hinky because we'll talk about relational, what are called combinators, attribute selectors, some of the pseudo things that are in there. So we'll get into all that. How the cascade rules work, believe it or not, I mentioned that to you yesterday. And if you remember, there are default things that are set by the browser. All right, I already showed you how to overwrite those. And if in the same on the same page you have both an external CSS file and you have an internal CSS and style tags, and you have a span with some kind of a style tag in it, the one that seems least important, which would be the span with the style tag, that takes precedence over the style tag, which takes precedence over the external. That's the cascading effect. But what if you do this? What if I've got an external file and I've got H1 and I tell it to be green? Then later on, I wasn't paying attention, so later on in my CSS file, I've got an H1 and I tell it to be red. What color do you think it'll be? It'll be red because the last one in wins. So there's rules like that that you have to be aware of as well. All right? All right. How to work with text? That's typically what you want to style. I mean, let's face it, with an image, what would you want to style? Maybe the height, maybe the width, maybe you want to add what's called a border radius to make it rounded. But you're typically not going to do much CSS on the image itself. It's normally text and everything you want to do with text. Now I'm going to go today, and I don't know if they even show it in here, but I'm going to show you their font family stuff, and then we're going to go out and talk about how you can go out and get yourself 1,100 different fonts for free. All right? All right, and then again at the end, now notice, unlike the last chapter, they'll show how they're going to lay out the page, then they'll show you the HTML, and they'll show you the CSS. So these next few chapters are CSS heavy. Okay? All right, and again, as we're going through these, if something doesn't make sense, please stop me. All right. So it says here, these are the three ways. I don't want to bore you, but you know that's external because it's an external file. You also know now, because I told you this, if you are going to use a normalized file, it must go before your file. Okay? Not only that, sometimes you will include different kinds of software, and that software, they may have their own CSS files. So order can really matter in here. And to make it just put one more layer on this onion here, you might go to work for a company and they may tell you you can create your own CSS, but we also have our own CSS file that we use for everything, which has got things in there like logo colors and whatever. All right. So this can get real easy, or this can get really complex. All right. So here's the style. So this is what I call external. This is what I call internal. So that would be in the head section. All right. Now, why do people do that? Sometimes I do it because sometimes if especially when I'm trying to teach, it's a pain in the butt to keep switching back and forth between files. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll do it as style tags. And once I get it to work and I'm done, then I'll move it to its own external file. So again, to take this right here, everything we've got in here, and make it an external file, what would we do? We'd remove this style tag. We'd remove this style tag. And then we'd grab all of what's left, all of this, and we'd put it in its own file. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. And then again, there's the worst way of doing it, which is typically referred to as inline CSS. What makes it really bad, notice on here what they've done. You could put multiple things in here. As long as you put a semicolon at the end of each one, you don't really have to after the last one. All right. And sometimes I've seen people do that, and it's like that's really bad programmatic type of practice to do that. All right. Okay. So this is the sequence. So it tries first with the external. If it has to, it'll overwrite with the internal, and then it'll overwrite with the inline. It has to be like that. If it was the reverse direction, you would never be able to see your inline styles because they'd be overridden by whatever you put in your externals, or could be overridden by anything you put in your external style sheet. All right. Not only that, when you take a look at this, it's totally possible, you can have different style sheets. All right. Not only that, and we'll get to this in a later chapter, quite often what you do is you have a different style sheet for printing, all right, than you do for somebody looking at it on the screen. If somebody is going to print out your website, a lot of times what you do is, at a minimum, you'll take anything that's on your site that's colored and you make it black and white. Because if they have a colored printer, now you're using up their colored printer ink. So almost always that's one of the first things you do. All right. Second, you might very well get rid of all the images. There might not be a need to print those. You might just want to print the text. All right. There's other things. We'll talk about that in a later chapter. So they call it embedded styles. I call it internal styles. So that was the name that I was taught. But it means the same thing. 2 ways to provide for browser capability. Well, let's see what they're talking about here. Oh, okay. There are still probably somewhere between 2 and 10% of people who use browsers that are still using like IE6, IE7, IE8. All right. Years ago, when I think it was about the time of IE7, so I don't know what the year was. All right. I was working at a college in Wisconsin, and I was asked if I wanted to go to this conference. And to sweeten it up, they gave me a hotel room for free. Said, bring your wife. All right, which was kind of neat. It was a couple hundred miles away, and they reimbursed me for gas, etc. Point is, I went, and it was a half an hour from my brother, who lives way up in northern Wisconsin. I'd never seen his house. So we decided the next day we were going to go out there. All right, and he was surprised because I didn't tell him first. So I rang his doorbell. Yeah, he's like surprised. He lets me in. He says, hey, I'm having problems with my computer, Jeff. So I looked at it. I'm not a hardware guy, but I can do some stuff. So I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at his browser, and I go, what version of Internet Explorer are you using? So whatever came with a computer. It was IE2. Now, 6 was the one that was out there at the time. All right? And I said, why don't you upgrade your browser? I don't know how. It's not hard. And I said, in fact, I'm going to have you do it. I'm going to show you the buttons you click. So he did it. And he goes, oh, good, now I can do that, whatever. But a lot of people just don't. It's whatever comes with a computer. And let's face it, a lot of times today with computers, they're almost like anything else. You keep them for 2, 3, 4 years, and you throw them away. And people, whatever it comes with, all right, that's what they keep. All right, but some of the older browsers don't recognize especially some of this new stuff. So you can put in what's called a shiv. They say a shiv or a shim. I've never heard it called a shim. It's a shiv, which basically says, for example, if you don't know, there's a bunch of new tags with HTML5. For instance, there is a color tag that brings up like the color box, color picker box. And what this is saying is, hey, if you don't understand that, just make it a text box. All right, that's what this does. It basically says it's dumbing down what you're trying to do to try to make it so it at least shows on the person's screen. All right, now this is considered old school today, and most people don't even do it. In fact, the author says here, because the use of older IE browsers accounts for a very small percentage of browser usage, none of these examples in the book use the shiv. You will still see it out there on some sites. All right. There's the normalized file that I showed you before, so I'm not going to show you how to download it, etc., and put it in. We already did that. All right. Let's talk measurements and colors. All right. And these go, in my opinion, from worst to best. So I will tell you, I don't think I've ever used points. That's something typically that I worried about, points, when I used a typewriter. My first degree is in journalism. For a while, I was a reporter. All right, I literally had the old-fashioned typewriter. All right, now we're talking back in the 70s. All right, so not exactly what you have today. All right, but the point is, I worried about points then. I've never used points ever. Pixels I've already shown you, at least somewhat. What do I mean? Well, let's look, because maybe I'm lying to you, and I'm not trying to, but let's see. So let's go back to here, and let's go back to our styles file. And it doesn't really look like we have. So I'm going to change this so you see the use of this. All right. Now, just so you know, I'm going to show you here pixels, and I'm going to show you rems. Did you hear me? I'm going to show you those two things. 16 pixels equals 1 rem by default. I didn't make these rules up. You can actually change that, but that's what it is by default. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to say font size, and I'm going to say 64 pixels. What that means is the H1 tag on any page that uses this should be 64 pixels. Does that make sense? So I'm going to save this and go back here and go back to my page. You see how the size has changed? Makes sense, doesn't it? If I wanted it to be half that, I could make it 32 pixels. The problem is that's an exact amount. It's always going to be that number of pixels. All right? But when I start going down, I'm going to change this, and instead of that, I'm going to make it 4 rem, which is the same thing. All right? And when I bring it back up again, it still looks the same. But rems are what are called relative units. So it's relative to the size of the screen you have. Pixels and points are absolute units. That's the difference. Now, to make it even more confusing, not from me, because I didn't make these rules up, but to make it even more confusing, there's M's and there's rems. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you start creating a really complex page, and we talked a little bit about divs and other stuff and whatever, header sections and nav and main, but imagine you had a really complex page. So let's just say, to keep it simple, it's a little more complex. So let's just say I've got a div, and I've got some stuff in here, and then I've got another div, and I got some stuff in here, and finally I've got another div. There's actually a reason that I'm showing you this. So I'd have to end this div right here. Then I would end this div right there. Then I would end this div out here. And if you say, I don't know what you mean, just imagine it's a bunch of text. That's all. All right. If I'm working with rems, it's all based on what's set at the top of my document. So if I reset my default font size, some people do this. They reset their default font size to 10 pixels instead of 16. Why that? Because then I can multiply something by 10 as opposed to multiplying it by 16. See the difference? All right, you don't have to do that. But if instead of using rems, I use M's, so let's say that in here, I set the font size to, I'm just making this up. So I set it to, let's say, 3 M's. That means all of that text will automatically be 3 M's. So will all of this, so will all of this. But if I come in here and I set the size to 2M, now this stuff will all be 2M. So it's relative to the parent. And it keeps working its way up until it finds a parent that's got something set. And if it has to, it goes up to the top. All right, and it uses the default from the browser. I find M's harder to work with than rems. You may or may not agree with that. All right. If on your test it says use M's or rems, then use the one that you think is easier to use. All right. You can also use percentages, things relative to the current value. You're going to see that as we go in here. All right. Here's a percentage. Font size 100%. All right. Margin left. Notice they're using M's in here. The best way to learn this is to just kind of what I just showed you, and then just go in and start playing with it. All right. That is the best. Well, it's the best way to really learn anything. All right. So again, pixels and points are absolute. Rems, M's, and percents are relative. All right. All right. I guess I may have skipped something here, so let me go back again. maybe not. All right, so let's spend a minute and let's talk about colors. All right, and I'm going to show you, we'll work with a couple easy things. We'll work with black and white. Okay, in fact, we'll work with black, we'll work with white, we'll work with red and green and blue. We'll work with those 5 colors. All right, so if I come in here into my CSS file and I come in here and we'll use the H1 and we'll use the color for that. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this stuff that's in here and I'm going to say color. You know this already, that if I put this in and I say B, for example, right? It shows me all of the built-in browser colors that start with B. Makes sense, correct? So for instance, if I want this to be white, I can just type in white. Boom, it's white. But I want to show you right now other ways of putting it in other than saying white. The problem is sometimes you want a certain kind of white. You see what I'm saying? You don't want real white. You want something else. Well, let's see, for example, do they have? I don't know. No, I want eggshell white. See that? It's not in there. So what do I do? Well, one thing I can do, and I'm going to show this kind of in stages, is I can come in here and I can say eggshell white hex code. Boom. And that I can put in there, and that'll give me eggshell white. All right? And I'm going to show you and explain what all that stuff means in just a second. The other thing I can do, and this is what a lot of people do, is they come in and type in something like HTML color picker. And it brings up something like this, and it lets you figure out what your color is. So if that's a neat blue. Now I know exactly what it is. And it shows me what's called the red, green, blue, or RGB. I don't know what the heck that stands for. This is the hue, saturation, and light there, and that's a variation of hue, saturation, and light. So I'm going to just pick white because it's the easiest to work with and just show you how we can set all those. All right? So if I want to set this to white, I can use the word white. You've already seen that. I can also say I have to start this with a pound. And by doing that, it says I'm using what's called the hexadecimal notation, base 16. All right? And what I put in here are either three numbers or 6 numbers. And I'm going to show you the difference between those in just a second. And it's the amount, the first 2 numbers are the amount of red. The second 2 numbers are the amount of green. The third 2 numbers are the amount of white. Of blue. Red, green, blue, RGB. All right. So the numbering goes from 0, 0, which is a total absence, to FF, which is a total presence. This is base 16, and the way you count again is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, not 10. A is what we'd call 10, B 11, etc. F would be like 15. 1, 0 in base 16 means 0 1s and 1 16. Does that make sense? All right. So I'm going to come in here and I want there to be a total presence of red, of green, and a blue. And notice what color it gives me. Now, since these repeat, F, 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 you only need to put it in 3 times. All right. That's only if you got a repeating pattern like that. Now, what's another way we can do it? We can come in here and say RGB, red, green, blue. Now we put 3 numbers in there, but for whatever reason, it's not 0, 0 through FF anymore. It's 0 to 255. So 255 is total red, 255 is total green, 255 is total blue. And you'll notice again, it's white. As you'd probably guess, if I changed each one of these, watch what happens. If I leave this, so I make that 0, see how it changed? Because that's what you get when you combine green and blue. If I do it again, now it's blue. Now the blue, that's the blue default color. You say, oh, I don't like that blue. Well, you can go in and use the color picker, or just, you could just type in blue hex code and it'll show you a bunch of variations. All right. So the other ones we're going to talk about in just a second. But this is right here, this that you're seeing here is the same as if I typed in either pound 0000 FF, it's the same color, or if I typed in blue. So again, you might think, well, if I've got these built-in colors, green, gold, blue, and there's about, I think, 150 of them, there might be more, I don't know. Why don't we just use those? Because then what happens is when you start actually going in and doing some customization, then you've got a combination of, predefined colors and color codes, and it's just considered bad practice. All right. So let me jump back into the book here. We'll take a break in just a couple minutes. All right. But so again, 16 descriptives more than that, descriptive color names. All right. So they show color silver. All right. Here's it with red, green, blue. So 100% red, 40% green, 20% blue. Here it is with, I guess you can use RGB with percentages. I don't do that. But I use the numbers all the time. All right. Again, all F's is white, all O's is black. So if I wanted red, I could either say color red, or I could say color and do pound FF0000, or I could do an RGB and in the parentheses 255, 0, 0. If that makes sense to you, there's really nothing else to say. All right. The other one that is available to you is HSL, which is hue, saturation, and light. That deals with using percentages. Some people love using that. I've read articles online that people say, oh, that's the greatest thing ever. Some people hate using that. All right. They don't talk about it real much in here. It's right there. It says you can use these. Now notice there's also RGBA and HSLA. What the heck is that? Well, let's go back to our page and take a look. Now we said this was blue, right? I'm gonna make it like this, but I'm gonna say here RGB. Whoops, try it again. So if I say RGB, and if I come in here and I say 0 red, 0 green, 255 blue, that's blue. You already saw that. But I'm going to change this now from RGB to RGBA. And what that represents is how transparent or how opaque you want this to be. You put another number in there. And notice if I put in a 1, okay, let's take a look. I'm going to save this. I'm going to leave it as 1. All right, you see the color. That's our H1. That's total blue. All right, now purple's the crummy background color for this. Let's change the background here to white so that it really shows when we do this. All right, so there it is with white. You can see it. Now I'm going to change this, and instead of making it 1, I'm going to make it 0.5. You may or may not be able to tell, it's still that regular blue, but it's more washed out looking. That A stands for alpha. It's the amount of opacity that you put in. It's how bright or how dull you want it to look. So for instance, if I toned it way down here and set it to 0.1, now it's almost transparent. You can do this, and there's even ways, and this is at the end of our book, that you can start at one thing and have it blend in, where you can have something fade in, etc. So this is typically just done more for effects. All right. So just want to make sure we're done with the color section, and we'll take a break. So they've got in here, again, 3 different ways. So they talk about hue, saturation, and light. I very rarely use that. There's nothing wrong with it at all. All right. Take a look at it if you're interested. All right. I don't think you'll have any homework or any tests that ever go through any of that stuff. To my knowledge, you will not. All right. Okay, it's 9:02. Let's come back at 9:15. All right. We'll pick it up there on how to code selectors.